What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Before I get started on the video, just want to let everybody know I will be live on Bad Dog's channel tonight for Talking Giants. We'll talk about, obviously, the week coming up against Justin Herbert tomorrow. I'll be over there live streaming the game as well, and we'll see if the New York Giants can pull off a miracle win. They're coming in as 9.5-point underdogs, and as you guys know, you guys usually steer the topic of conversation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of off-season talk, talking about the roster, talking about the general manager, and potentially the head coach, Joe Judge. So come on over there for that. Should be a lot of fun. But in this video, we're going to talk about, in my opinion, the most important part of this New York Giants team right now, being that we need somebody to come in here and set this team up for success, not just for next year, but the foreseeable future. The New York Giants are going to need a strong man at the top in the general manager position. John Mara in the past has shown an unwillingness to think outside the box when it comes to the general manager. He's played it safe, whether it be bringing in Ernie Accorsi's replacement with Jerry Reese, or then Dave Gettleman, who, of course, had prior ties to the Giants, a guy that was a former scout for the Giants, went over to the Carolina Panthers, got them to a 15-1 season, I think 2 or 3 years into his tenure, but eventually was ridden out of Carolina, and the Giants went out there and picked him up. They chose him over a number of candidates, but the majority of the candidates that Mara interviewed the first time around were guys that he had some familiarity with. And in this video, I'm certainly going to talk about some of the guys that he may be looking at, especially based off some of the things that have been said by Ian Rapoport, and we'll get into exactly what he said, and I'll get into some of the outside candidates that if I was the owner, I would at least want the New York Giants to take a good, hard, strong look at. But first, we'll talk about Dave, and believe me, I'm going to have a video up on Dave when the New York Giants officially move on, whether it be due to retirement or whether it be due to him stepping down. But we all know at this point in time, yes, you can nitpick and find a couple of good things that he's done, but overall, Dave Gettleman has been an abysmal failure for the New York Giants. There's no other way around it. The team has not won a lot of games. Some of it may be due to bad luck. There's been injuries. I get it. But overall, he has not gotten the job done. Daniel Jones, whether it be due to him or due to the parts around him, has not succeeded as a quarterback. You took him 6th overall, and the offensive line is no better than it was when you initially took the job. Right now, there is one long-term answer on that offensive line, that being Andrew Thomas, and that is something that is definitely going to be passed down to the next general manager. The same challenge that Dave had when he took the job, fixing the offensive line, something that has been a major problem for this New York Giants team for the better part of a decade. So we'll see whoever replaces Dave, how they're going to do that. But I think we all agree as we start this video that Dave Gettleman is on his last legs, and he will eventually step down as the New York Giants general manager. It's just a question of when it's going to happen, not if, and I would expect it to happen, if not before the end of the season, shortly thereafter. And then the general manager search will begin. And then the question becomes is, what are the New York Giants going to do? Well, according to Ian Rapoport 2 weeks ago, who I trust, he's an NFL insider with a lot of knowledge around the league, he said this: in the building, there would be some strong candidates to replace him, notably VP of Football Operations and Assistant GM Kevin Abrams. Outside the building, the organization will likely look at some candidates with a background in the New England scouting system, more in line with Judge's thinking along with others, which would lead you to believe, and then he went further into detail talking about Joe Judge, that at least Rapoport feels from what he's heard, Joe Judge more than likely will not be replaced. Now, will that be what happens? We don't know. You know, things may change, and maybe Rapoport will get new news, and maybe a new story will come out in 2 weeks. But as of now, at least according to Rapoport, as recently as 2 weeks ago, the New York Giants would lean towards trying to build a GM around Joe Judge and trying to build this team up. I made a video a couple of days ago talking about that. I don't know if that's the wisest decision. I think the New York Giants get the most credible general manager that could come in here and fix this team once and for all. The question is, how many GMs are going to want to take this job, knowing that this team has not had a lot of patience at the top with John Mara, especially if you went out to fire the head coach? We'll see. They have 2 first-round picks. There's not much cap flexibility going into next year, and they would, of course, if there are any credible outside general manager candidate, would want to have say in terms of who's going to be their head coach and who's going to be their quarterback going forward, and we'll see what John Mara decides to do in terms of allowing some of these candidates to have some freedom, because I think that's the most important thing if you're trying to bring in the best possible general manager candidate. But we'll have to wait and see. Let's go over some of the candidates that I could see potentially getting this job with the New York Giants. I'm not even going to talk about Abrams, by the way. Let me, before I start, Abrams goes without saying. He's definitely a candidate. Abrams has been here for the last 20 years or so with several general managers for the Giants. He's moved up the ladder in terms of responsibility. When Abrams first took the job with the New York Giants, in terms of being hired, he was hired specifically due to his mathematical skills. He was known as a capologist. That was his first role with the Giants. He's since moved moved up but does not have any experience for the most part in terms of scouting players. The Giants have passed him over in years past and would certainly not be a move that would excite the New York Giants fan base. To me, that's a lateral move. Not much of a change there. More than likely, it would just basically be what we've had. Outside of the funny press conferences with Dave Gettleman, Abrams has at least been on board with the decision-making. He's had a lot of say in what the New York Giants have done, and there's no change there. So he's not really a guy I want to talk about. We know a lot about him as is, and I would not be thrilled if the New York Giants chose Abrams to be the replacement for Dave Gettleman. But the first guy we're going to talk about is Kyle O'Brien, being that he is on the New York Giants staff, and I think he's at least a possibility for the New York Giants to bring in. He also has ties to the New England Patriots in the past. Came from the Detroit Lions before he came to the New York Giants, and as you saw, the Giants brought in a lot of former Detroit Lions, including Kenny Golladay this past offseason, and maybe O'Brien had something to do with that. O'Brien's title currently with the New York Giants, as you see in the picture, is College Scouting and Senior Personnel Executive. Kyle O'Brien, who has had 2 decades of scouting and personnel experience in the NFL, joined the Giants front office this year in the newly created position of Senior Personnel Executive. He has worked in player personnel for 4 different teams in capacities that covered both pro and college scouting. So he's got a lot of experience around the league. Like I said, has ties to the New England Patriots. And a lot of people felt like when we brought O'Brien in, who I think is like 43 years old, that he was potentially going to be the replacement for Dave Gettleman, being that he had such strong ties to Joe Judge in the past. So he's clearly a guy you want to keep your eye on that could potentially be the future GM for the New York Giants. Let's get to learn a little bit more about O'Brien before we go over the next candidate. Got this from the Daily News when he first got hired by the Giants. Kyle O'Brien, a veteran NFL personnel man with the New England Patriot roots, joined the Giants on Monday in the newly created role of Senior Personnel Executive. O'Brien, 42, born and raised in Garden City, Long Island, was the right-hand man the past 5 seasons to ex-Detroit Lions GM Bob Quinn as Detroit's Director of Player Personnel in 2016 and VP of Player Personnel from 2017 to 2020. Not necessarily a ringing endorsement coming from the Detroit Lions. That organization is an absolute mess. Then, later going on to say this in the article, O'Brien was one of 3 internal candidates interviewed for the Giants GM vacancy in December before they hired Brad Holmes away from the LA Rams. Giants head coach Joe Judge worked with Quinn for 4 years, from 2012 to 2015 in New England, where Quinn, 2000 to 2015, and O'Brien, 2002 to 2011, were longtime evaluators under Bill Belichick. So that's where they got their roots, and it's clearly obvious as to why some people felt like when he first got the job, could be the guy that could be the future GM for the New York Giants, and you would have to think that he had at least to feel that that was a distinct possibility to leave the role that he had with the Detroit Lions. But his pre-draft Detroit NFL background includes 10 years scouting for the Patriots. I actually already read that. So that's basically what I was able to pull up on O'Brien. The next guy we're going to bring up is Louis Riddick. And Louis Riddick is a very popular name. And it seems like the New York Giants fan base overall is very divided on the potential for Louis Riddick to become the New York Giants' future GM candidate. I'll give my full opinion on him and what he could potentially bring to this job and some of the things I don't like if he were to be hired. Of course, if Riddick got the job, I'd give him just as much of an opportunity as anybody else. Comes across as a pretty intelligent guy on TV, but the question is, would he be qualified to take this job for the New York Giants? I think a lot of fans like Riddick, due in part to the fact that he says the things that the fans feel. That does not mean he'd make a great general manager candidate. Here is the overall background on Louis Riddick. After his playing days were over, Louis Riddick joined the world of player personnel. This is where Riddick really began to make a name for himself. In 2001, he joined Washington, I believe the university, as a pro scout. After 4 seasons, he was promoted to Washington's director of pro personnel. Riddick spent 3 seasons in the role before leaving for the Philadelphia Eagles organization in 2008. There, Riddick spent 1 season as a scout, then another season as an assistant director of pro personnel before again being promoted to the director spot. Riddick spent 4 seasons as the Eagles director of pro personnel before leaving to join ESPN. And I believe that was in 2013. Thanks to a wealth of knowledge and an accessible way of presenting it, Louis Riddick quickly became a fixture on ESPN's NFL programming. His work included appearances on ESPN's First Take, frequent spots with Ryan Clark, and others on ESPN's flagship program, SportsCenter, and a spot on the NFL Live crew. Today, Riddick can be heard alongside Steve Levy and Brian Greasy as part of the 3-man crew heading up the booth for Monday Night Football. Would Riddick leave the booth and the media side to get back into an NFL front office? The life of the talking head and the life of an NFL front office starkly contrast. though both are consumed with football. So there's the article on Louis Riddick in terms of what he could potentially bring to the table. And that was probably the Washington football team. I think I made a mistake there that he started with. Then he went over to the Eagles and spent a number of years there. So he does have experience in terms of being a professional scout at the NFL level, which is why he had the credentials to get the job with ESPN in the first place. The Giants interviewed him back in 2019. It was abundantly clear, or 2017, I should say, I think. It was abundantly clear that he wanted the job. It seemed as if him and Gettleman were two of the finalists to get the job. Eventually, the New York Giants went with the guy they're more familiar with Gettleman. And since then, he's been very critical of the New York Giants, rightfully so. The New York Giants have not made a lot of good decisions, which explains the record that they currently have. Now, a lot of backlash that he gets from the fan base is some of the decisions that he would have made wouldn't have necessarily worked out, which, at least gives you caution as a Giants fan. If he were to get the job, would he do a good job? Because he said he would have drafted Dwayne Haskins. I think we could all agree Dwayne Haskins more than likely would not have worked out with the New York Giants. Dwayne Haskins failed miserably with probably an even better circumstance with the Washington football team. Ron Rivera couldn't wait to get him out of there. He was the same guy that said he would have extended Landon Collins. We could all agree that the contract that Landon Collins got with Washington really hasn't worked out. He's the same guy that said he would have taken Isaiah Simmons over taking a tackle in a draft class where the New York Giants clearly needed help at the tackle spot, where they ultimately ended up with Andrew Thomas. He also said he would have been on board with taking Saquon Barkley. So you go back and you listen to a lot of things that the guy had to say, and you say to yourself, well, if he did become the GM, would things have been much better? And it's easy for him to go on ESPN and be critical of the New York Giants. The question is, can he get the job done? And at least in my opinion, there are probably more qualified candidates that I'm going to go over in this video. If they hire him, of course, I'm going to give him a great opportunity and hope that he can get the job done as the New York Giants general manager. Next guy we're going to talk about is Brad Ziegler from the New England Patriots. And I actually think this is a very, Dave Ziegler rather, not Brad Ziegler, I'm sorry, Dave Ziegler. And I actually think this is a very interesting candidate. Like I said, the reason I looked into him, the New England roots, he's been with New England for quite some time and almost became the general manager for the Denver Broncos last year. He actually started with the Denver Broncos, I believe, and he was a little-known commodity. He only got the job due to Josh McDaniels, who I believe had a past experience in the late 90s with him, brought him on that coaching staff. Denver was impressed with him, and eventually Ziegler found himself back with McDaniels with the New England Patriots. But let's go over the history of Ziegler, and is definitely a guy that you at least want to keep your eye out on as a potential candidate that the New York Giants could look to bring in. It had been 8 years since Dave Ziegler first turned him down, this talking about John Elway and when he passed on the potential job with the Denver Broncos. Then as a Bronco scout, leaving for New England. This time as the Patriots' assistant director of player personnel, Ziegler had withdrawn his name from Elway's general manager search one day after interviewing. The sting felt familiar. They were disappointed when he left in 2013. He was viewed as a shooting star, and you want to keep people like that, a league source said. He was really, really, really good in his interview. Article went on to say this: you know when someone's going to be a player in this league and when they're not, a league source said. He's got all the personality traits of someone who is going to be that guy soon. For now, he's the Patriots guy, sources say. Ziegler is committed to the franchise long term. They say that, of course, if they get a better job opportunity, they could jump at it. He's described as a sharp, tireless evaluator whose scouting reports have contributed to Super Bowl wins. Ziegler is also unusually connected. Everything's just a phone call away. That's a great trait to have, especially being a potential GM candidate in the league, another source said. There's so much blank that's thrown on your plate every day. You need this ability. Then later in the article went on to talk about this with Ziegler. Over a 3-hour video call on January 10th, Ziegler outlined his vision for the franchise. This talking about the Denver Broncos in his interview last year. He demonstrated an intimate knowledge of Denver's roster in all three phases, impressing Elway and Broncos coach Vic Fangio. Ziegler then stressed investing in people, integrating departments of Denver's football operations, and laying a team-first foundation from which everything would spring. Overall, Ziegler said the franchise would constantly evolve around key principles, many he planned to borrow from the New England Patriots. So it kind of has a Joe Judge vibe. I'm not saying that this is something that should excite you as a New York Giants fan, but if the New York Giants feel that Joe Judge is a guy they want to build around, Ziegler to me seems like a natural fit. He's young, he's upcoming, and he's impressed organizations along the way. What scrapped those plans was a Cole Ziegler received from one of a few people in football with more clout than a Hall of Fame quarterback turned Super Bowl winning executive, the greatest coach of all time. Then it later goes on to talk about how Bill Belichick basically gave him a promotion and he became Bill Belichick's right-hand man, which is what ultimately allowed him to stay with the New England Patriots. But Ziegler is certainly a guy that maybe you want to keep your eye on if you're a New York Giant fan. The next guy we're going to talk about from and this is more of an outsider guy, but he's a guy that certainly intrigues me and a guy that I think the New York Giants should have interest in is Mike Borgonzi. And he's a guy you've heard over the last couple of years that is one of the hot candidates that could be the next hotshot general manager in the NFL. He's been a scout, I believe, since 2009 with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he's now the assistant GM with the football team and has been widely credited with a lot of the success that the Kansas City Chiefs have had in terms of player evaluation since he's been there. This came out from Pete Schrager, who I think works for Good Morning Football, in terms of what he heard around the league about him. Pete Schrager, director of football operations, Mike Borgonzi is Kansas City Chiefs' secret weapon. Let's get a little bit more knowledge on Borgonzi, what I was able to dig up from an article. Mike Borgonzi has become a hot name in recent months with his quick ascension up the Chiefs front office. He's been a scout for 11 years and has worked his way up the reins, becoming promoted 6 times in 10 years, working with one of the best general managers in the NFL, Brett Veach, as well as Chris Ballard during his time in Kansas City, and learning from former Chiefs general manager Scott Pioli, who we're going to talk about in a minute, have helped Borgonzi's evaluations and developed his football mindset. Borgonzi is the best talent is one of the best talent evaluators and takes a hand-on approach during the draft process, an area where the Chiefs have excelled as of late. Meshing that mindset and the skills learned under Veach about managing the cap and leading a Super Bowl team should make Borgonzi an appealing candidate for every vacancy. So I think that's obvious. If the Giants are going to go for an outside candidate, that is definitely a guy that I, as a Giants fan, would be intrigued by if the New York Giants brought in for an interview. Next up is going to be Ed Dodds, and this has been a very popular name that you've heard throughout NFL circles over the last couple of years as a potential future general manager candidate. There have been some rumors that Dodds may not even want that kind of role, and that remains to be seen. He's probably waiting for the best opportunity, and he may not view the Giants as that, but Dodds, by many, has been called the best scout in the NFL, and we're going to get into a quote that I'm going to pull up for you guys, but you look at how the Colts have drafted since he's been there. I mean, they have drafted incredible. They've built an incredible offensive line. He, of course, had some bad luck with Andrew Luck retiring. Had Luck stayed on, the Colts may have won a Super Bowl. In recent years, Jonathan Taylor obviously worked out great. He may even win the MVP this year at the running back position. In addition to that, we all know Quentin Nelson, along with several other players that he's brought in recent years. Quentin Nelson, Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, and Darius Leonard, all within the last 3 NFL drafts he's brought in for that football team. So certainly a guy that has been widely credited and, like I said, is known as one of the best scouts in the NFL. Here's a profile from him from the Colts website. Ed Dodds, Indianapolis Colts. If you ask 10 front office people around the league who's the best scout in the NFL, the chances are you're going to hear Ed Dodds' name the most. The current assistant general manager with the Indianapolis Colts, no one in the league is more widely acknowledged as the top scout, which is why Ballard poached Dodds from Seattle and gave him a right-hand seat to his throne in Indianapolis. So it's possible that Dodds is waiting it out. Why isn't Dodds a household name? As I've been told, he doesn't particularly like attention that comes with being a decision maker and might not even have the desire to be a GM. That would be great news for the Colts, but Dodds should start getting calls soon to interview for top jobs. And he did get a couple of interviews last year, ended up, I believe, turning them down. But if he's a guy that would be interested in this job, the New York Giants should certainly listen long and hard. Next guy we're going to bring up, and I think it's the last guy that I'm going to talk about, and there's several other guys I could have talked about. Monty Osenford's definitely a popular name I've heard. Elliott Wolf, both from the New England Patriots organization. But here we're going to talk about Scott Pioli. Scott Pioli has, again, a common theme on this list because I'm listening to what I've heard from Rappaport. With New England roots, he's also been around the league. We'll talk about some of his stops, but he's a widely acclaimed talent evaluator. He's been a 3-time executive of the year, as you're going to see here. Started with the Cleveland Browns as a pro personnel assistant from 92 to 95. With the Ravens, a pro personnel coordinator. Then went to the Jets as director of pro personnel. Then went to the New England Patriots as an assistant director of player personnel. Then the New England Patriots director of player personnel in 2001. Was the vice president of player personnel for the New England Patriots from 2002 to 2008, became the general manager, so he's the only guy on this list with general manager experience for the Kansas City Chiefs from 2009 to 2012, then went to the Atlanta Falcons as an assistant general manager from 2014 to 2019. Of course, the Falcons during that span ended up having a Super Bowl appearance in which they choked it away to his former team, the New England Patriots, 28-3. So clearly a guy with a good resume. Let's put it that way, and I'm sure a guy that the New York Giants may strongly consider if he would want this job. So there's a list of names, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that you guys have heard about that the New York Giants may consider. Those are guys that I expect to at least be called by the New York Giants, or at least the majority of those guys to at least be called by the New York Giants to fill the vacancy in terms of the general manager. If you ask me who is most likely to get this job, I'm going to go with probably O'Brien due to the fact that he's currently on this staff. He's got New England roots. Would he be my choice? No. I would want an outsider. I would love a guy like Dodds. I would love a guy like Borgonzi. We'll see if the New York Giants even bring him in for interviews, and if they do, if they'd be interested in the job. A lot of that's probably going to come down to whether or not John Mara is going to give them full say. If he does, those are guys you got to keep an eye on. But we'll see how it all plays out. Just wanted to get a video up going over some of the candidates that I could see the New York Giants bringing in to potentially replace Dave Gettleman. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.